What would you do if one rainy night, two little girls showed up at your door, shivering, scared, and said, "You're our father?" What if you had no children? No reason to believe them. No one waiting for you at home except the ghosts of your past? This is the story of Hank Taylor, a lonely mechanic in a small town whose quiet life was turned upside down by a knock on the door and a second chance he never asked for. It's a story about love that doesn't need blood to be real, about forgiveness, healing, and how the smallest acts of kindness can spark the biggest miracles. So if you believe in the beauty of redemption, in families built by love, not chance, you're in the right place. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt, inspiring stories that stay with you long after the final page, consider subscribing, not just to follow this journey, but to be part of a community that believes in hope, second chances, and the kind of love that changes lives. Now, let me take you to Maple Creek, where the garage light is always on, and everything began with a single knock. A poor mechanic found twin girls sleeping outside his garage. They said, "You're our father." Maple Creek was the kind of town where time walked instead of ran. A two-pump gas station, a diner that still served meatloaf specials, and a handful of faces that hadn't changed in 20 years. The nights were especially quiet, and especially in November, when the trees stood bare like forgotten skeletons, and the wind hummed a lonely tune through the empty streets. Hank Taylor stood in the yellowed light of his garage, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had long since given up trying to stay clean. The Taylor's Auto Repair sign above the bay door flickered with tired defiance against the sleet that had begun to fall. He looked at his watch. 9:47 p.m. Late for a man who had no one waiting at home. The clang of metal echoed faintly behind him as he locked up the last toolbox. Another slow day. One oil change, two tire rotations, and a polite but final, "We're going with the dealership," from a longtime customer. Business had been dwindling for years. Hank didn't complain. He wasn't the kind who did. He just kept showing up, one bolt at a time. He was about to switch off the porch light when something caught his eye. A flicker of movement near the side of the building, beneath the narrow awning where old tires were stacked. At first, he thought it was a stray dog. But as he stepped closer, boots crunching on the gravel, the shape grew clearer. Two children. No. Girls. Small. Curled into each other under a thin soaked blanket. Their hair was the same shade of honey blonde, matted to their cheeks by the rain. They were shivering so violently their teeth chattered in rhythm. "Hey now," Hank said gently, crouching beside them. His voice was gruff from disuse, but low and warm. "You all right, sweethearts? Are you hurt?" One of the girls stirred. Her eyes opened, wide, impossibly blue, and far too tired for someone her age. "Are you Mr. Hank?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He blinked. Yeah, I'm Hank Taylor." The girl looked at her sister, who nodded once without opening her eyes. She turned back to him, eyes shining with tears and something deeper. Fear, maybe, or hope. "You're our father," she said. The words hit Hank like a wrench to the chest. He rocked back on his heels, heart stuttering in his ribcage. For a moment, the only sound was the sleet tapping on the metal roof. What did you say?" The girl pulled the blanket tighter around her sister. "Our mama. She told us your name. She said if anything ever happened, we should find you. She said you fix cars, that your garage would always have a light on." Hank stared at them. Every instinct in him screamed confusion. He'd never had kids. He'd never known he had kids. He hadn't seen Emma, the only woman who had ever mattered, since the day she left without saying goodbye. That was, 9 years ago? He looked at the girls again. They couldn't be more than 8. "Come on inside," he said softly, shaken to the bone, but steady in his steps. "Let's get you dry and warm, and we'll talk." The garage had a back room Hank used as his makeshift office and break area, a small cot, an old electric heater, a dented kettle, and a table that doubled as his dinner companion most nights. He flipped on the light and draped a clean shop towel across a chair. "Sit here. I'll get you something hot." The girls moved like fawns, cautious, quiet. They didn't ask questions. They didn't cry. That scared Hank more than anything. He heated water on a hot plate and poured it into chipped mugs with instant cocoa. As the smell of chocolate filled the small space, the girl's cheeks flushed pink again. He handed them the mugs, kneeling in front of them. "I'm sorry," he said gently, "but I think there's been a mistake. I never had kids." The one who had spoken earlier, Lily, he'd soon learn, reached into a small, water-damaged backpack. She pulled out a plastic bag, inside of which was a folded note and a photograph. Hank took the photo first. His breath caught. It was Emma. Emma, with her wild brown curls and crooked smile, holding two babies, one on each hip. She looked tired, but she also looked happy. The note was short. "Hank, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't know where else to send them. You're the only good man I've ever known. Please take care of them. I'm sorry." "Emma," Hank's hand trembled. The photo slipped from his fingers and landed on the floor, face up like a ghost that refused to fade. He stared at the two girls, now sipping cocoa, eyes flickering between him and the heater. Emma's eyes, Emma's nose. They had her features, no doubt, but there was something else too, a quiet resilience that felt hauntingly familiar. "Where have you been staying?" he asked, his voice rougher than before. "Bus station. Then someone told us about Maple Creek," Lily replied. "Mama said it was where you lived. We walked, slept in old places." Hank stood slowly, trying to process the impossible. His world, quiet, simple, built on routine, had just been turned inside out by two small strangers and a ghost from his past. But he didn't ask them to leave, didn't call the sheriff, didn't question the absurdity of it all. Because deep down, in a place beyond logic and doubt, something shifted. He looked at the cot, too small for three. He'd sleep on the floor. "Finish your cocoa," he said, voice softer than it had been in years. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Outside, the sleet turned to snow. The Taylor's auto repair sign buzzed quietly in the dark, refusing to give out. Inside, for the first time in nearly a decade, Hank Taylor didn't fall asleep wondering what he'd lost. He lay awake, listening to the slow, even breaths of two little girls and the soft hum of something fragile and unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Hope. Morning in Maple Creek came quietly, with a sky the color of old cotton and the snow from the night before, lying soft and unbothered on the world. Inside the garage, Hank Taylor stirred from a restless sleep on the cold concrete floor, his back stiff and unforgiving. He sat up slowly, blinking against the gray light filtering through the high windows. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd dreamed it all. The girls, the photo, the letter. Then he heard soft voices behind the curtain he'd strung up to divide the office from the garage bay. Children's voices, not a dream. He stood and stretched, joints cracking like old lumber, and pulled the curtain aside. Lily and her sister, he'd learned her name was June, were sitting cross-legged on the cot, still wrapped in the blankets he'd found the night before. They were playing some quiet game with bottle caps and an old bolt like it was the most natural thing in the world. June looked up and grinned. "You snore like a bear." Hank huffed a small laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation." "You live here?" Lily asked, more curious than judgmental. "Sort of," he replied, making his way to the hot plate. "Not much need for a big house when it's just me. Garage is warm enough, and the coffee's not half bad." June wrinkled her nose. "Coffee is gross." "Agreed," Lily added. "You're not wrong," Hank said with a smile. "But I drink it anyway. Habit, I guess." The kettle hissed. As he poured the water and stirred the coffee, the silence between them thickened. He could feel the weight of unspoken things. Too many questions, not enough answers. He handed each girl a slice of bread with peanut butter and sat on the edge of the desk. "We need to talk," he said gently. "About last night. About your mama." The girls exchanged a glance. Lily's face shifted, cautious but calm. "She's gone," she said simply. "She got real sick. The hospital people tried, but she didn't wake up." Hank swallowed hard. He didn't know how to hold that kind of grief for children. He barely knew how to hold it for himself. "I'm sorry. She told us to find you," Lily continued. "Said your name was Hank Taylor, that you were good, that you'd know what to do." "Did she ever say why she picked me?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated. "She said you used to love her, that you were going to be my daddy once. But something happened. Hank looked down at his coffee, suddenly tasting the bitterness. Something had happened, all right. Emma had left 9 years ago. Just left. No note, no goodbye, no forwarding address. One day she was folding his flannel shirts and laughing at his terrible singing, and the next she was gone. He'd searched for months, called hospitals, looked through missing person reports, even drove to her sister's last known address in Omaha. Nothing. She'd vanished. Until now. He reached into the desk drawer and pulled out the photo from the night before. Emma, holding the twins. He stared at it for a long time, his thumb brushing the edge of her smile. "How old are you, girl?" he asked. 8.5, June said proudly, mouth full of bread. That would have been just months after Emma disappeared. His stomach twisted. "You're not... I don't think I'm your father," he said slowly, watching their faces. "Not biologically. Emma never told me she was pregnant." June looked confused, but Lily's face didn't change. "She said it didn't matter," Lily replied softly. "Said if something happened to her, you were still the one we should go to." There was no anger in her voice, no desperation, just a quiet certainty that broke Hank's heart wide open. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. That afternoon, Hank took them to the county office. The social worker, Ms. Ramirez, was a sharp-eyed woman with kind hands and a calm voice. She took the letter, the photo, and the backpack. She asked questions. Hank answered what he could, which wasn't much. No birth certificates, no legal guardianship, no proof of relationship. "They can stay with you temporarily," she said at last, "but the state needs to verify next of kin. We'll begin a placement process unless a biological connection is proven or legal custody is arranged." "What about DNA testing?" Hank asked. "We can start that, yes. But even if you're not the father, the girls need stability. If their mother named you, that counts for something." Lily sat quietly beside him, holding June's hand. "She said he's our dad," June piped up, "even if he doesn't know it yet." Ms. Ramirez smiled gently. "Children often know more than we give them credit for." As they left the office, Hank paused on the front steps. Snow had started falling again. Soft, steady. The girls looked up at him like he was the sun. "What now?" Lily asked. Hank looked down at her. His heart didn't have space for logic anymore. Only this strange, sudden responsibility that felt less like a burden and more like purpose. "Well," he said, putting a hand on each of their shoulders, "I guess we find you both a proper place to sleep that doesn't involve oil stains and crankshafts. Then maybe figure out where to hang your coats." That night, he dragged an old space heater into the garage bay and cleared out the corner. He set up a borrowed mattress, found 2 faded sleeping bags, and let the girls pick out which of his oversized t-shirts they wanted as pajamas. As he turned off the light, June whispered, "Do all daddies live in garages?" Hank chuckled softly from his cot. "Only the lucky ones." The heater hummed faintly in the garage that night, casting warm air over the sleeping forms of Lily and June as snow tapped lightly on the roof. Hank lay awake on his cot, staring at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head. He hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. Not since Emma. Not since everything. But this was different. Not insomnia from loneliness. Not restlessness from unpaid bills or the ache in his knees. This was something else. Something heavier. The girls breathed softly across the room, nestled in their makeshift corner with hand-me-down blankets and a stuffed rabbit June had named Muffin. The air still smelled faintly of motor oil and rubber, but it had changed. Lighter, somehow. Warmer. Emma. Her name echoed in his chest like an old bell. Seeing that photo again had jolted something loose in him. The memory of her voice, the way she'd laugh with her whole body, the smell of lavender in her hair. All of it had been buried deep beneath years of rust and resignation. He sat up, careful not to wake the girls, and reached for the photo again. Her eyes looked straight into his, just as they had when she'd first walked into the garage. A flat tire and a 1,000-watt smile. More than a decade ago. He had fallen for her fast. Hard. It was like trying to stop a freight train with his bare hands. She was unlike anyone in Maple Creek. Sharp and funny, with a kind of restless energy that made him feel alive again. She made him believe that maybe he wasn't just some guy who fixed cars and drank black coffee in silence. Maybe he could be something more. Someone more. And then, one morning, she was gone. No fight, no warning. Just her half of the closet empty and a folded note that said, "I'm sorry, I can't stay." He had never understood it, never found closure. Just questions that settled into his bones like winter frost. Now here he was, 9 years later, with two girls asleep in his garage, claiming to be his daughters, holding a photo and a note signed by the same woman who had broken him. He rose quietly and stepped into the office. From the same drawer where the photo had been hidden, he pulled out a thin envelope. It was yellowed with age, brittle around the edges. The one she'd left him that morning. He'd never thrown it away. Opening it again felt like reopening a wound that had never healed. "Hank, this is not your fault. Please don't try to find me. It's something I have to do alone. I love you. That's why I have to leave." No explanations. No trail to follow. Just pain, until now. The next morning, Hank was already up when Lily patted in, rubbing her eyes. "You sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. "It's warmer than the bus station." He smiled. "We'll get you girls something better soon. I promise." Lily glanced at the photograph on the desk, the one with Emma and the twins. "Do you miss her?" Hank didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, hands in his pockets. "Every day," he said at last. "She used to sing to us," Lily said softly. "Mostly old songs. She said you taught her one. Something about the moonlight and a truck." Hank chuckled despite himself. "Harvest Moon. Neil Young. She hated country, said it was all about breakups and beer. But that song, she'd hum it every time she was doing dishes." Lily nodded like she knew. Maybe she did. "She said you were the only person who ever made her feel safe," Lily added, "even when she messed everything up." Those words hit harder than he expected. "Did she ever say why she left?" he asked gently. "She said she made mistakes, big ones, and that some things couldn't be undone." Hank leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "That's not true, you know." "What's not?" "That some things can't be undone." He looked at her, his voice firm but kind. "Sometimes you get a second chance." Later that day, Hank drove them into town in his rusted pickup. Maple Creek was small, but it had its charms. Main Street with its antique shop and cafe, a small library with crooked shelves, and a church that doubled as a community center. People noticed, of course. Hank Taylor, longtime bachelor, pulling into the diner parking lot with two girls in the front seat. He could see the questions in their faces as they passed. Neighbors, old customers, the mayor's wife. But no one said anything. Not yet. Inside the diner, Miss Dot, owner, waitress, and town gossip, raised a penciled eyebrow as she poured Hank his usual. "Well now," she said, setting down 3 menus. "Didn't know you'd started a youth outreach program." "Their family," Hank said simply. Dot blinked. Then she smiled. "That's good. You needed family." Lily and June each ordered pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream. Hank had the breakfast special and a strong cup of coffee. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like they'd always belonged together. That afternoon, back at the garage, the girls found a box of old things Hank had nearly forgotten. Photo albums, knickknacks from the early days, and a cassette player that miraculously still worked. June popped in a tape and hit play. A familiar voice filled the room, raspy, melancholic. "But I'm still in love with you. I want to see you dance again." Hank froze. Emma's voice, singing over the recording. She had recorded herself singing Harvest Moon. He'd forgotten all about it. He sat down heavily on the cot as her voice washed over him. And suddenly the years between them collapsed into that one melody. That one moment when love was still a promise, unbroken. The girls swayed along with the music, unaware they were stirring ghosts. But Hank didn't mind. Some ghosts deserved to be remembered. The following Monday brought more than just a layer of frost on the windshield. It brought paperwork. Hank stood in the county office again, wearing his best flannel shirt, freshly ironed for the first time in years, though it still smelled faintly of diesel and sawdust. Lily and June sat side by side on the stiff plastic chairs in the waiting area, kicking their feet in rhythm and whispering about which of them could make the receptionist smile first. Hank glanced at them and shook his head, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Across the desk, Miss Ramirez tapped her keyboard with quiet precision. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to Hank. So, she said, folding her hands, we've initiated the DNA test. That'll take a few weeks to process. In the meantime, we're treating this as an informal kinship placement. Meaning? Hank asked, brow furrowed. Meaning the girls can stay with you for now. But until there's a formal guardianship or custody decision, you're not legally recognized as their parent. You're a safe harbor. He nodded slowly. I can live with that. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Taylor, it's important you understand what this means. Medical decisions, school enrollment, even something as simple as a field trip permission slip. You won't be authorized. Hank shifted in his chair. I get it, but they've got nowhere else to go. And you're sure you want this? He looked back through the glass window into the waiting room. June was braiding Lily's hair, tiny fingers working with the same concentration he used when rebuilding a carburetor. Their eyes were bright, voices light, as if they had no idea their lives were balancing on the edge of a system too big to understand. I'm sure, he said. Whatever they need, I'll figure it out. Miss Ramirez studied him for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded and pushed a thick stack of forms across the desk. Start here. That night, after the girls were tucked in beneath a patched-up electric blanket and the garage bay was quiet again, Hank sat at the workbench, pen in hand, glasses sliding down his nose. The paperwork stretched into the second hour, but he didn't complain. He hadn't realized how many pieces of information were required to become someone's safe harbor. Employment history, medical background, personal references. His emergency contact line was left blank for a long time before he wrote down the name of Pastor Whitmore, a man who had once helped Hank fix a church van and later prayed with him after Emma left. He scribbled his signature on the last page just as the heater clicked on with a low groan. The warmth reached his knees, but the weight in his chest was something no thermostat could fix. He was scared, more scared than the day he'd buried his father, more than the time his truck rolled into a ditch in the middle of a January blizzard. This fear was quiet, slower, like a question that had no answer. What if he wasn't enough? In the morning, the girls woke to the smell of cinnamon and burnt toast. Hank had found a can of rolls at the back of the fridge, near expiration, and thought he'd try his hand at something special. June bit into hers and made a dramatic face. Not bad, Mr. Hank, she said, mouthful. Tastes like Christmas. Lily chewed thoughtfully. It's kind of crunchy on the bottom. That's how you know it's gourmet, Hank said, pouring milk into chip mugs. They ate together like it was a routine they'd had for years, not days. The familiarity was alarming in its comfort. After breakfast, Hank handed them each a small notebook. What's this for? June asked. Your first official school assignment, Hank said. You'll be enrolling next week. But until then, I figure we can do a little homeschooling. I want you to write a story. About what? Lily asked, suspicious. About whatever you want. Could be a fairy tale. Could be about the worst breakfast ever served in a garage. June grinned. That's easy. Lily bit her lip, serious. Can I write about my mom? Hank nodded. Absolutely. Later that day, they visited the thrift store down on Jefferson Street. Miss Marla, the owner, lit up when she saw Hank walk in with two young girls. Well, well, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. Didn't think I'd live to see the day Hank Taylor walked in for anything but a replacement toaster. Need some clothes, and he said. Kid-sized. She arched a brow. You fostering? Sort of, he replied. Long story. Marla looked at the girls, then at him, then back at the girls. She said nothing more, just waved them toward the racks and added, Anything you need, you let me know. First round's on the house. Marla, I can't. Don't argue, she said. Just say thank you and pick out something with sequins before these girls think you've got no taste. June found a pink sweater with silver stars. Lily chose a denim jacket that made her look older than she was. They're perfect, Hank said. And he meant it. That night, back in the garage, the girls worked on their stories while Hank cleaned out a corner to set up a proper table. He found an old lamp, replaced the bulb, and adjusted the height so the light hit just right. Lily handed him a page before bed. Can you read it? He read it aloud, his voice trembling halfway through. Once upon a time, there were two girls who lost everything. But then they found a place that smelled like oil and had a kind man who didn't talk much but made the best burnt toast. And even though he wasn't their real dad, he made them feel like they were finally home. Hank swallowed hard. I like happy endings, Lily said sleepily. Me too, Hank whispered. The garage smelled different now. It wasn't just the oil and rust and old coffee. It was something else, something new, something warm. It smelled like crayons and peanut butter, like secondhand fabric softener from the thrift store, like hope, clumsy, unexpected, and tender as a child's hand in your calloused one. Hank stood at the front of the garage, the morning sun slanting through the high windows, watching Lily and June sketch chalk drawings on the concrete just outside the bay door. June had drawn a lopsided cat with wheels. Lily was working on what appeared to be a spaceship made entirely of flowers. Both were barefoot despite the chill, hair tied up in messy ponytails, and laughing so hard they nearly fell over. They didn't look like girls who'd lost a mother. They looked like they belonged, and the town was starting to notice. It started with the deliveries. The first was a brown paper bag left on the garage steps. Inside were 3 grilled cheese sandwiches, still warm, and a napkin with a smiley face drawn in black marker. No name, no note. The next day, it was a bundle of coloring books and 2 brand new toothbrushes and a pink ribbon. Then a box of canned soup and boxes of macaroni with a card that read, Kids get hungry. Call if you need more. Dottie Erarf the diner. By the end of the week, there was a small pile beside the tool shelf. Winter coats, mittens, school supplies, a pair of sparkly purple rain boots. Hank didn't ask for any of it. He didn't need to. Maple Creek had always been the kind of place where folks waved at passing trucks, where the postman knew your dog's name, and where gossip traveled faster than truth. But it was also a place where kindness quietly did its work. Still, not everyone was on board. On Saturday, Hank took the girls to the town's library, a 2-room brick building nestled beside the church, where Mrs. Whitley, the town's only librarian and unofficial moral compass, reigned from behind her oak desk like a benevolent queen. Mrs. Whitley was in her 70s, wore her hair in a tight silver bun, and spoke with the finality of someone who'd seen enough of the world to recognize trouble from 10 paces. She watched as Lily and June browsed the children's section, giggling at the Dr. Seuss shelf. Then she turned her eyes on Hank. You're playing with fire, Hank Taylor. He stiffened. Ma'am? Children don't belong in garages. They belong in homes, with mothers, with fathers who don't disappear when it gets hard. Her words landed sharper than she knew. I'm doing the best I can, he said quietly. Mrs. Whitley studied him, and something in her stern face softened. I know you are, but love alone won't keep them safe. Make sure you're not trying to fix what can't be fixed. You're a good man, but good intentions have their limits. Hank didn't argue. He knew the truth in her words. Still, as he watched June proudly hand over her new library card and Lily tuck her chosen books under one arm like prized possessions, he couldn't help but think. Maybe good intentions were exactly what this broken world needed more of. Later that evening, the girls helped him clean out the old garage closet. It had once held spare parts and forgotten tools, but Hank had decided it would make a decent space for a reading nook. June sat cross-legged, blowing dust off a box labeled Keepsakes. What's in here? Old stuff, Hank said, brushing off his hands. Mostly junk. Lily opened the box gently. Inside were photos, black and white snapshots of Hank as a boy, a Polaroid of his dad holding up a fish, and, near the bottom, a wrinkled birthday card signed, Love Always, Emma. Lily studied it. She really did love you. He looked over her shoulder, heart tightening. I think she did. June held up a tiny plastic toy truck. Can I keep this? Sure, he said, throat dry. The girls arranged their new reading corner with pillows, a small lamp, and the cardboard box turned sideways as a bookshelf. When it was done, Lily stood back and nodded. Perfect. And for a moment, it was. That night, Hank was closing up the shop when a familiar voice called his name. Taylor! He turned to see Pastor Whitmore walking up the gravel path, wind tugging at his coat. Tall and lean with a trimmed beard and worn leather Bible under one arm, the pastor had been Hank's quiet friend for years. Someone who didn't press, didn't pry, just showed up when it mattered. I hear your quiet garage got a little louder lately, Whitmore said with a smile. You could say that. Sucker, the pastor studied him for a moment. You all right? I don't know, Hank admitted. I keep wondering if I'm doing this right, if I'm giving them enough, if I'm going to mess this up. You will, Whitmore said without hesitation. We all do. Hank raised an eyebrow. But what matters is you're showing up, the pastor continued. Every morning, every night, you're giving them safety. That's more than most kids get. He looked out toward the darkened town. And Hank, he added, voice quiet, don't underestimate what God can build with a heart that stays open. Later, Hank stood alone in the garage, watching the moonlight filter in through the high windows, casting a soft glow on the reading nook, the chalk drawings still visible on the floor, the twin sleeping forms under their patchwork blanket. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but maybe it was the life he was meant for. And as he turned off the lights and pulled the garage door shut, he whispered a promise to no one and to everything. I'll stay open. I'll show up. Because love wasn't perfect. It didn't come with blueprints or instruction manuals, but it was workable. And Hank Taylor was nothing if not a man who knew how to fix things. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Hank was under a pickup truck, socket wrench in hand, grease on his knuckles, the sounds of Lily and June giggling in the distance as they argued over whose paper airplane could fly farther. The cold November air slipped in through the open bay doors, but the heater fought back bravely, humming like an old friend. He almost didn't hear it at first, a quiet, hesitant knock on the side door that led to the office. 3 taps, soft, measured. Not the sheriff, not a customer. Something about it made him pause. He slid out from under the truck and wiped his hands on a rag as he made his way to the door. He opened it slowly, and there she was, Emma. The years had changed her, but not so much that he didn't recognize her instantly. The wild curls were shorter now, streaked with gray near her temples. Her face was thinner, paler, and the eyes that once laughed so easily were shadowed with something far heavier than time. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, Hey, Hank. His breath left him in a sharp exhale. Emma. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Her voice was raspy, thinner than he remembered. Her coat was too big, the scarf at her throat worn and unraveling at the edges. He opened the door wider. They sat in the office, silence between them like static. The girls were still outside, oblivious to the earthquake quietly rumbling inside. I thought you were dead, Hank said quietly. Emma looked down at her hands, fingers knotted together. I almost was. He waited. She closed her eyes, took a breath. After I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to hold you back. I didn't want to bring my mess into your life. And then I found out I was pregnant. Hank blinked. But the girls, not mine, she said softly. They're my sisters. Anna. You never met her. She was living in Florida. Got mixed up with a guy who turned out bad. Really bad. Emma's voice cracked. When Anna passed, the girls had no one. So I took them. I tried to give them a life. But I wasn't doing great myself. Barely scraping by. Working night shifts, moving from one cheap place to another. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she arrived, he saw the truth written deep in her eyes. Shame, grief, and something else. Surrender. Then the diagnosis came. What diagnosis? Hank asked, alarm rising. Lymphoma. Stage 2. That was 8 months ago. She smiled bitterly. I didn't have insurance, didn't have time, I just ran out of everything. She paused. Except for one name. Hank swallowed hard. I told them you were their father because I didn't know what else to say. I didn't think I'd see you again. But I knew if they had a chance, you were it. You were always the good one, Hank. He stood and walked to the window, needing space from the tidal wave of everything she'd just said. So you lied, he said after a long silence. Yes, she whispered. He turned to her. And you left, disappeared. Let me think you were gone forever. I know. And now you show up after I've been trying to hold this together, after they've started calling me dad. And what? You want to take them back? No, she said quickly, voice trembling. God, no. I don't want to undo anything. I don't have the right. Then why are you here? Because I missed them, she said. And I missed you. And I thought, maybe there was still something here. Something I didn't destroy. He didn't respond. Behind the silence, the sound of laughter echoed through the bay. Lily's and June's carefree joy, like a melody from a world that hadn't broken. Emma stood. If you want me to go, I will. I needed you to know the truth. He turned, eyes meeting hers. She looked older, yes, but underneath all of it, the weight of years of illness, of sorrow, there was still the woman he had once loved so deeply that her absence had left a scar he never tried to heal. And somehow that scar no longer ached. It burned. Not with anger, not anymore. With something dangerously close to hope. He walked her to the guest cot in the corner of the garage. You can stay here tonight, he said quietly. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. She looked up at him. Thank you. Before he turned to go, he paused. I never stopped loving you, you know, he said. Even when I tried. Emma blinked. Her lips parted slightly. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The next morning, Lily found them both in the garage kitchen, Hank pouring coffee, Emma sitting at the small table in one of his old flannel shirts, her hair wet from a shower. Lily froze, blinking like she'd seen a ghost. Mom? Emma stood slowly. Hi, baby. June ran in a moment later, and for one breathless second, time folded in on itself. Emma knelt. I'm here now. I'm sorry I was gone. I missed you so much. Ah. The girls rushed into her arms, tears and smiles and confusion mixing in a chaotic bundle of emotion too big for their small bodies. Hank stood to the side, heart swelling and cracking all at once. Later that day, he stood beside Emma as they watched the girls play hopscotch in the parking lot, giggling with reckless joy. I don't deserve this, she said softly. Neither do I, he replied. But here we are. She looked at him. You could have turned them away. You could have turned me away. He gave a small shrug. The door was never locked. And for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, Emma let herself cry. Not from sorrow, but from the quiet, painful grace of being forgiven. By the end of the week, the rhythm of the garage had changed again. Emma, though pale and easily tired, had begun to move with quiet purpose, folding laundry, sweeping corners Hank hadn't touched in years, helping the girls with their homework in the evenings. She didn't speak often about her illness, but the signs were there. The way she rubbed her temples when she stood too fast, the bruises that appeared too easily on her arms, the fatigue that set in after even a short walk. Hank noticed it all. He didn't say much either, but he was watching and worrying and remembering. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the stoop behind the garage, wrapped in an old wool blanket, eyes fixed on the tree line where the last of the leaves clung to the branches like they didn't want to let go. He handed her a mug of tea. Chamomile, the fancy stuff, he said. She smiled, tired but genuine. You always made the best tea. Don't lie, he said, sitting beside her. You once said my tea tasted like dishwater. I was younger then, she said, taking a sip, and a lot less polite. They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet between them no longer brittle or sharp, but soft, like an old blanket, mended and worn, still useful. You seeing a doctor now? He asked carefully. Emma hesitated, then nodded. The one in Greenville. The girls don't know everything yet. Just that I was sick. You still sick? She took another sip. I'm in treatment. Early stage. They caught it in time, I think. But it's expensive and exhausting. I've had to stop and start too many times. Hank looked out at the woods. I've still got a little in the bank. Not much, but enough to get you to your next appointment. She looked over, startled. I can't take your money. Didn't ask if you would, he said simply. Just said it's there. Her eyes welled, but she blinked fast, swallowing the emotion. You never changed, she said. I did, he replied. I just got quieter about it. Later that evening, Emma helped June build a volcano for science class using baking soda, vinegar, and way too much food coloring. The eruption sent red foam spilling over the counter, and the girls screamed with laughter. Hank watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. Emma looked up, flushed and laughing, a red streak on her cheek. We're learning. It's messy. It always is, Hank said. The next day, Emma and Hank drove to the clinic in Greenville. A quiet hour on winding roads lined with winter-naked trees. The girls stayed with Miss Dodd at the diner, where they got spoiled with pancakes and chocolate milk, while Hank and Emma sat in a waiting room painted in pale blues and too many motivational posters. The nurse called Emma's name. She stood, then turned back. "You don't have to wait. I'm not going anywhere," he said. She nodded once, then disappeared behind the door. While he waited, Hank read a pamphlet on treatment options and another on support for caregivers. The word caught him, caregiver, like it didn't belong to him. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt right. He was giving care in every way he knew how, and it was changing him. They drove home in silence for the first few miles. Emma was pale again, visibly drained. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "The doctor said the chemo's working, slowly, but it's working." "That's good." He asked if I had a support system, someone to help. She looked over at him. "I told him I did." They were quiet again. Then she said softly, "You could have hated me, Hank. You probably should have." "Maybe," he said, "but hating you never made sense. Loving you did." She turned to the window, blinking fast. That night, Hank found Lily in the reading nook, scribbling in her notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked. "A story," she said, "about how love can be like fixing a car." He raised a brow. "That's so?" "Yeah," she said seriously. "Like sometimes you think it's broken, but really it just needs someone to care enough to try." Hank sat beside her, quiet for a long time. "That's a pretty smart story," he said. She shrugged. "You fix stuff. Mom used to break stuff. I write about it so I don't feel so weird." "You're not weird, sweetheart. You're brave." She smiled but didn't look up. Days turned into a week. Then two. The girls settled deeper into the rhythm of garage life, school days, and bedtime routines. Emma began to regain some color. Hank found himself humming while making breakfast. One Sunday morning after church, Pastor Whitmore pulled Hank aside. "You look different," the pastor said. "I feel different." Whitmore studied him. "She's back. That a good thing?" "I think it is." "Think or no?" Hank paused. "No." "Then let her in," the pastor said. "Second chances don't knock twice." That evening, as snow began to fall lightly outside the garage and Lily and June drifted off under their blankets, Hank and Emma sat at the old workbench, sipping tea. She reached over and took his hand, a small gesture but steady. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she said. "I can't promise much, but I want to try, if you'll let me." He looked at her, at the scars and strength in her eyes, at the quiet storm she carried so gracefully now. "I never stopped leaving the light on," he said, "even when I thought you'd never come back." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and in the warmth of the garage, surrounded by the smell of metal and oil and childhood laughter, a new kind of love took root, older, wiser, and more deeply earned than anything that had come before. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It was thin and official looking, stamped with the seal of the county and addressed to Hank in rigid block letters. It sat on the counter of the garage for most of the morning, unopened, as Hank rotated tires and changed oil and tried not to think about it. But it sat there like a weight, like a question that needed an answer. It wasn't until lunchtime, while the girls munched on grilled cheese in the break room and Emma rested on the cot with a book across her chest, that he finally picked it up and tore it open. He read the letter twice, then a third time, and then he sat down, slowly, letting the reality of it settle deep in his chest. That afternoon, while the girls colored at the table and the heater whirred faintly in the background, Hank knelt beside them. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked. Lily looked up first, always the more watchful of the two. "Are we in trouble?" "No," he smiled. "Not even close." He pulled up a stool and held the letter in his hand, folding it in half like it would soften what came next. "They finished the DNA tests," he said gently. June blinked. "What's that again?" "It's a way to tell who someone's biological family is, to see if I'm your real dad by blood." Lily's hand curled around the crayon she was holding. "What did it say?" Hank took a breath. "It said, I'm not." Silence fell over the room like a blanket. Not harsh, just thick. June looked down. Lily looked away. "But," Hank continued, voice steady, "it also said something else, something important." The girls glanced back. He leaned forward. It said I can still be your dad. Legally, if I want to adopt you. Lily blinked, unsure. But we're not yours. Hank smiled, eyes warm. That doesn't change how I feel about you. Blood doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Showing up does. He pulled out two small boxes from under the table and placed them gently in front of each girl. They opened them slowly, curious. Inside were necklaces, simple silver chains with small, round pendants. One had L engraved, the other J. Wakanon, June's eyes lit up. They're so pretty. They were my mom's, Hank said, and hers before that. They've been in my family a long time. I want you to have them. Lily's lip trembled. But what if you change your mind? He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I won't, I promise. She stared at him for a long moment, and then without a word she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him off the stool. June followed, wrapping her tiny arms around both of them, all elbows and warmth and emotion, too big for words. They stayed like that for a long time, and when Emma walked in and saw them, her daughters and the man who had chosen to love them, without condition, she quietly turned back around and let the moment hold its own. A week later, Hank stood before the judge in a small, wood-paneled courtroom with a nervous knot in his chest and the girls gripping either side of his hands. Emma sat behind them, cheeks flushed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a firm voice, looked over the paperwork. Mr. Taylor, she said, adjusting her glasses, you understand that adoption is permanent. You'll have the same legal responsibilities as any biological parent. Are you prepared for that? Yes, ma'am, Hank replied. Do you wish to proceed? Hank looked down at Lily and June. They stared up at him, eyes wide and hopeful. I do, he said. And girls, the judge turned to them with a gentle smile. Do you want Mr. Taylor to be your father? June didn't hesitate. He already is. The courtroom chuckled softly. The judge smiled wider. Well then, she said, signing the paper with a practiced stroke. As of today, Lily and June are officially Lily and June Taylor. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The girls squealed and threw their arms around Hank, who knelt down to hold them close. In the quiet celebration that followed, with the courthouse clerk handing out lollipops and a bailiff taking a photo on Hank's old flip phone, Emma walked up to him and placed her hand gently on his arm. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I know, he said. That's why it matters. That evening, back at the garage, they celebrated the only way they knew how, with pizza from Sal's, sparkling apple cider, and a chocolate cake from Miss Dot that looked like it had been frosted by a blindfolded child and loved all the more for it. Emma sat at the corner of the workbench, watching the scene unfold. Hank was helping June glue googly eyes onto a cardboard robot. Lily was writing Taylor Girls Rule in glitter on a poster board. The garage echoed with laughter. When Hank finally joined her, sitting down with a slice of pizza in hand, she turned to him. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You don't need to, but I want to. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. All right, then promise me one thing. Anything. Don't run again. She looked at him, startled. I won't, I swear. Good. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Because I've been holding on to this. She opened it. Inside was the note she had left all those years ago, folded carefully, corners worn from being opened too many times. Emma blinked back tears. You kept this? I read it more times than I care to admit, trying to understand. She looked down at it and then back at him. Do you understand now? I don't think I need to anymore, he said. We've got a new chapter now, a better one. He took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers. Let's write it together. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the oil-stained driveway and the chalk drawings from days ago. Inside the garage, under the warm hum of the heater and the golden light overhead, a family celebrated not what they had lost, but what they had chosen. And love, steady, unflashy, enduring, wrapped around them like a second skin. Spring didn't arrive all at once in Maple Creek. It crept in quietly, softening the frost-bitten earth and coaxing daffodils from the edge of the gravel lot behind Hank's garage. The snowmelt trickled down from the hills, and for the first time in months, The air no longer carried the scent of wood smoke in winter, but of new beginnings, wet soil, motor oil, and something like hope. Inside the garage, things were changing too. The workbench had been cleared of its usual clutter, replaced with hand-drawn artwork from Lily and June. A smiling truck with flowers growing from the tailpipe, a stick figure family standing in front of Taylor's Auto and Heart Repair, and a colorful sign that read, "Girls Welcome Here." Business was picking up again, slowly but surely. Word had spread, partly from Miss Dott's diner, partly from Emma's quiet persistence, that Hank Taylor was back, with a steadier hand and a heart even more generous than before. Some came for repairs, others just came to talk, and some came for what couldn't be fixed with tools. It was Emma's idea to start offering complimentary rides for single mothers in need of car repairs. She called it Taylor's Grace Days. Once a month, she'd put out a flyer, simple, black and white, promising a free checkup and discounted labor for anyone in a bind. At first, Hank resisted. "Emma," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I can barely cover my own costs. What if they take advantage?" She tilted her head. "What if they don't?" He didn't argue, mostly because he knew she was right, and she didn't stop there. Emma had always been good with numbers, and now she took over the books, organizing receipts into color-coded folders, setting up a spreadsheet on the old garage computer that Hank hadn't used since 2012. She brought in fresh towels for the bathroom, painted over the peeling employees-only sign, even added a little potted fern to the front counter. At first, Hank grumbled about it, called the plant ferny and claimed it made the place smell like soap. But the truth was, the garage hadn't felt this alive in years. Neither had he. One sunny Saturday morning, June stood on a milk crate, helping Hank replace the brake pads on a 2006 Corolla. Her hair was pulled into twin puffs, safety goggles too big for her face, but she looked every bit the apprentice. "You think I could be a mechanic when I grow up?" she asked, peering into the wheel well. Hank smiled. "If you can get that bolt loose without stripping it, you already are." June stuck her tongue out in concentration and turned the wrench with all her might. The bolt gave with a satisfying click. She squealed with pride. Lily, meanwhile, was in the office with Emma, cataloging parts and filing invoices, like she'd been born with a clipboard in her hand. She had her mother's sense of order, Hank thought, and his knack for noticing the small things that mattered. Later that day, when the girls had gone inside for their usual post-lunch reading time, Emma stood beside Hank in the garage bay, arms crossed, watching the wind stir dust across the floor. "It's different now," she said. "What is?" "This place. You. Us." He looked around. The same cracked floor, the same tin roof, the same fading Taylor's Auto Repair sign, and yet everything was different, because now love lived in the corners. "I think it's the best it's ever been," he said. But healing wasn't just in the building, it was in the people too. Emma's hair had started to grow back, soft curls returning at her temples, just a hint of the wildness he remembered. Her cheeks had more color, her voice more strength. She still had rough days. Mornings where the nausea lingered too long, afternoons when fatigue stole her breath. But she smiled more, laughed easier, held Hank's hand like she meant it. And Hank, who once thought his life was winding down like a rusted engine, was learning to believe in forward motion again. One evening after the girls had gone to bed, he found Emma sitting under the string lights they'd hung outside the garage, wrapped in a blanket, a steaming mug in her hands. He joined her without a word. They sat in the quiet for a while, listening to the sounds of spring, crickets, distant wind chimes, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. "I used to think I was too broken to come back," Emma said softly. He glanced over at her. "I thought I'd ruined every chance I had at being a mother, at being a partner, at being whole." "You didn't ruin anything," he said. "I walked away. And then you walked back." She looked at him, eyes shimmering in the low light. "Do you forgive me?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "This used to be for the front door of my house," he said. "But I figured maybe it should open something new." She stared at it, then took it, her fingers brushing his. "Hank, I don't know what the future looks like," he said, voice low. "But I want you in it. And the girls, I want this, for real this time." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then let's build it together." The next morning, the girls found a new sign hanging beside the old one. Still hand-painted, a little crooked, but lovingly done. Taylor Family Garage, auto repair, and second chances. They stood in the sunlight, arms around each other, reading the words over and over. "Do you think people will come?" June asked. Hank put a hand on her shoulder. "They already are." And as the doorbell jingled from the front counter and the familiar clang of a socket wrench echoed in the bay, the garage breathed in its new life, full of joy, full of noise, full of family. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Hank Taylor didn't just feel like a man fixing cars. He felt like a man who had finally found home. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the sun filtered through the clouds like an old photograph. Golden, familiar, and slightly faded. Hank was adjusting the lift under a battered Ford pickup when the garage bell jingled. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward the front. A man stood just inside the doorway. Early 40s, tall, wiry, leather jacket, sunburned skin, and the nervous energy of someone who didn't belong but wasn't ready to admit it. He removed his cap as Hank approached, revealing dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that didn't quite know where to land. "Can I help you?" Hank asked, tone polite but guarded. The man hesitated. "Yeah, I'm looking for someone. Emma." The name fell heavy between them, like the sound of a dropped wrench in a quiet room. "She here?" the man asked. Hank's shoulders squared. "Who's asking?" The man looked down at the floor, then back up. "Name's Caleb." The name struck something in Hank's memory, faint and distant. He stepped closer. "Caleb. Caleb Rivers, Anna's ex." And just like that, the air shifted. Anna, Emma's sister, the girl's mother. Caleb. Emma stood at the doorway of the office, holding a coffee mug, her face pale. "Caleb?" she said, voice barely above a whisper. He turned quickly. "Em." She stared at him. Then slowly, she stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said quickly, hands raised. I needed to see them." Hank's eyes narrowed. "The girls?" Caleb nodded. "They're mine." Emma let out a sharp breath. "You don't get to say that." "I am their father." You were their father," she said, jaw tight. "Before the drugs. Before the nights you left them hungry. Before Anna took them and ran." Caleb winced. "I know what I did. I know what I didn't do. But I'm clean now. 2 years. I've got a job. A place. I want to see them." Hank stepped between them slightly. "Why now?" Caleb's voice cracked. "Because they deserve to know I'm trying." Emma folded her arms, eyes flashing. "You think showing up with a fresh haircut and a story makes up for everything?" "No," he said, "but it's something." That night, Hank and Emma sat on the porch behind the garage, the girls asleep inside, unaware that their world had been tilted at the edges. "He's not wrong," Emma said, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Hank looked at her. "He is their father," she continued. "I may hate what he did, but I can't erase him." "You don't owe him anything," Hank said. Emma nodded. "I know, but they deserve the truth. And maybe he deserves a chance to prove he's not the same man." Hank exhaled slowly. "I don't like it." "Neither do I," she said. "But this isn't about us." She turned to him, eyes searching. "Would it be okay if he saw them? Just once. Supervised." Hank looked away, heart tight. "I'll talk to the lawyer tomorrow," she added quickly. "Make sure it's safe, legal, controlled." He nodded once. "One time, here, with me." The meeting happened 2 days later, in the back lot behind the garage. It was a quiet afternoon, and the sun was warm against the concrete. Emma sat on the steps nearby, watching. Hank stood at a distance, arms folded. Caleb arrived in a worn button-up shirt, holding a small paper bag. The girls were confused at first. Lily furrowed her brow. June clung to Hank's hand. "Who's that?" Lily asked. Emma walked over and knelt beside them. "That's Caleb. He's your biological father." Lily blinked. "But we already have a dad." She looked up at Hank, eyes steady. "Yes," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Yes, you do." Caleb knelt down awkwardly, not too close. "Hey, I brought you something." He handed them each a small sketchbook, the covers hand-painted with their names. "I'm not great at art," he said, "but I tried." June opened hers and smiled. Mine has a rocket on it, Caleb chuckled. I heard you liked space stuff. Lily looked at him, serious. Are you going to stay? Caleb's face fell. No, honey, I'm not here to take you away. I just wanted to see you and say I'm sorry for everything. There was a pause. Lily looked at June, then at Hank, then back at Caleb. Okay, she said, but you can't make Mommy sad again. Caleb swallowed hard. I won't. The visit lasted 20 minutes. Then Caleb stood, nodded at Emma and Hank, and left as quietly as he'd come. Later that night, Hank tucked the girls in and found Emma sitting at the edge of the bed in the office, looking out the window. You okay? He asked. She nodded. He didn't try to take them. He didn't lie. That was more than I expected. Hank leaned against the doorframe. You think he'll come back? Maybe, she said, but I don't think the girls want him to. She looked at him. They chose you, Hank. I didn't do it for that. I know, she said, standing. She walked over and took his hand. But it matters. The next morning, Lily left a note on the workbench. Dear Dad, thank you for being the kind of dad who stays. Love, Lily, your real one, even if not by blood. Hank stared at the note for a long time, the words like a balm to every silent wound he'd carried. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, right next to the old photo of Emma and the girls. It was a gray morning when the summons arrived. A plain envelope, no return address, just the weight of uncertainty inside. Emma opened it at the kitchen table in the garage break room, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the words once, then again. By the third time, Hank had already set down his coffee. What is it? He asked, voice low. She looked up, eyes wide and stunned. Caleb, he's petitioning the court. For custody? Hank said, already feeling heat rise in his chest. No, she said quickly. For visitation. Regular, structured visitation. Hank stood and walked to the window, fists clenched at his sides. After one visit, he thinks he's ready for regular time with them? Emma sighed, voice strained. It's not unexpected. The lawyer warned this might happen. He turned around. And you're okay with this? No, she said firmly, but I'm not the only one who gets a say. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. It would take place in the same courthouse where Hank had officially adopted the girls, where laughter had once echoed after a judge declared him their father. But this time, the air would be heavier, more uncertain. Emma spent those 2 weeks meeting with her attorney, reviewing statements, preparing documents. Caleb had hired representation too, a young, clean-cut man from a law office in Greenville. Hank didn't like him already. More than once, Hank found himself pacing the garage late at night, worry sitting in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He trusted the girls. He trusted what they'd built. But he didn't trust the system, not when it could reduce love to signatures and DNA. The morning of the hearing, the family arrived early. Lily wore a navy dress with tiny white daisies, and June had insisted on wearing her sparkly sneakers for luck. Emma looked calm, composed, but Hank could feel her anxiety in the way she squeezed his hand just a bit too tightly before they walked inside. Caleb sat alone at his table, hands folded, his expression unreadable. The judge, the same woman who had overseen the adoption, greeted them with a small nod. We're here today to review Mr. Rivers' petition for supervised visitation. Both parties have submitted documentation. Now we'll hear from those directly involved. Caleb spoke first. I know I wasn't the father I should have been, he said, voice quiet but steady. I failed Anna. I failed them. But I've spent the last 2 years working to be better. I'm clean. I've got a job, a stable place to live. I just want the chance to build something with my daughters. I'm not asking to take them away, just a chance to know them. His lawyer nodded approvingly. Emma was next. Caleb and I share history, she began, but I also share the truth. I took custody of the girls because Anna feared for their safety. Caleb has made progress, and I believe people can change. But I also believe that time doesn't erase trauma. I want what's best for them, and sometimes what's best is space. Then the judge turned to Hank. He stood slowly, palms sweating. I didn't expect any of this, he began. I didn't expect to become a father. I didn't expect 2 little girls to show up on my doorstep one night and call me something I'd never believed I deserved. But they did, and it changed my life. He paused. I'm not their father by blood. I know that. But I'm their father by everything that matters. By lunches packed and bedtime stories and late-night fevers and scraped knees. By presence. By choice. He looked directly at Caleb. I believe you're trying to do right. I do. But this isn't about redemption. It's about them. And right now what they need is peace. Stability. Not confusion. The judge nodded, then looked at Lily and June, who sat in the front row holding hands. Would either of you like to speak? She asked gently. Lily stood up. I don't remember him, she said, pointing to Caleb. But I remember when Mom got sick. And I remember Mr. Hank making us pancakes even when he burned them. I remember how he fixed June's robot when she cried. I remember him. She looked at the judge. He's our dad. June nodded firmly beside her. For always. The courtroom was quiet. Then the judge leaned back in her chair, hands steepled. Mr. River, she said, your efforts at recovery are commendable, and it's clear you care deeply for your children, but this court's priority is their well-being. She turned toward Emma and Hank. Given the girls' clear attachment, the legal adoption, and the testimony provided, I see no benefit in court-ordered visitation at this time. Petition is denied. Caleb bowed his head. There were no outbursts, no protests, just silence. And then something unexpected happened. Caleb stood, turned toward Hank, and extended his hand. I get it, he said. They're yours now. But if someday they want to know me, really know me, I hope you'll let them. Hank studied him for a moment, then shook his hand. If that day comes, Hank said, we'll cross that bridge. Together. That evening, back at the garage, the girls celebrated with grilled cheese and a sheet cake that said, Forever Family, in slightly smudged red frosting. Emma laughed so hard she cried when June added googly eyes to the leftover decorations. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the girls were curled up asleep in their nook, Hank stepped outside into the cool night air. Emma joined him a few minutes later, her arms wrapped in a blanket. They're safe, she said. They always were, he replied. They just didn't know it yet. She smiled at him, warm and soft. You're not just their anchor, Hank. You're mine too. He slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. No matter what comes next, he whispered, we've got this. And under the wide sky of Maple Creek, love stood taller than bloodlines, stronger than the past. Because love, real love, was never an accident. It was a decision, made daily, lived fully, chosen again and again. The garage sparkled in the spring sunshine like it hadn't in years. A long string of hand-cut paper flags fluttered from the bay doors, their edges dancing in the breeze. A folding table was covered in mismatched tablecloths, balancing trays of deviled eggs, lemon bars, and a potato salad so generous in size it needed its own zip code. Miss Dot had brought her famous peach cobbler. Pastor Whitmore arrived with 2 gallons of homemade sweet tea and a guitar slung over his shoulder. Even Mrs. Whitley from the library showed up, armed with books and a cautious smile. It was Lily and June's 9th birthday, but it was more than that. It was the first birthday they had ever celebrated with a real family. With cake, with candles, with people who stayed. And for Hank Taylor, it was the day the garage became something more than a workshop. It became a home, for good. The idea had started small, like all the best ones do. Emma had been flipping through an old photo album with the girls one afternoon when June asked if they'd ever had a party, a real one, with friends and music and hats. Emma blinked. Then she looked at Hank, who was elbow deep in a transmission, and asked, what would it take to turn this place into a celebration? He'd glanced around at the dusty shelves and grease-stained floor and said without thinking, hope, and maybe a mop. A week later, the whole town was invited. Hank stood near the grill, flipping burgers and dodging smoke, when he saw Lily weaving through the crowd in her denim dress, face painted like a tiger, grinning from ear to ear. Dad, she called breathless. June's trying to do a cartwheel in the parking lot. She any good? He asked, wiping his hands on a towel. Terrible, Lily laughed, but she says she's aerodynamic now. Hank chuckled and handed her a burger wrapped in foil. Fuel her up. She took it and paused. Hey, Dad? Yeah? I'm really happy. He looked down at her, this small miracle of a girl who had once knocked on his door with rain in her hair and a question too big for her years. "So am I, kiddo," he said softly. "So am I." He crossed the yard. Emma stood near the edge of the flower beds, chatting with Miss Marla from the thrift store. Her hair, growing in thicker now, bounced slightly as she laughed. There was color in her cheeks, strength in her posture. Her last scan had come back clear, a milestone they'd marked with milkshakes and a sunrise drive to the lake. She caught Hank's eye from across the lawn, and for a moment, the noise of the party fell away. There was only her, and the quiet gratitude of second chances. Pastor Whitmore strummed his guitar as the sun began to dip, the notes warm and golden in the late light. Children danced barefoot near the driveway, fireflies blinking their approval. Then, with a gentle smile, he called for everyone's attention. "I've been around this town for a lot of years," he began, voice gravelly and kind. "And I've seen a lot of stories. Some short, some messy, some that didn't seem like they'd turn out at all." He looked at Hank. But then a man opens his door one night, doesn't ask why, doesn't wait for proof, just opens his heart. The crowd murmured with soft smiles. And somehow in a town of cracked sidewalks and rusty signs, love grows again. He turned to Lily and June. "And you two," he said with a wink, "reminded all of us that family isn't about matching names or perfect plans. It's about showing up." Applause broke out, light and genuine. June bowed dramatically. Lily rolled her eyes and shoved cake into her mouth. Then came the moment they'd been waiting for. The cake, a double-layered chocolate sponge with thick white frosting, 9 bright candles dancing on top. Hank held the matches and Emma lit the candles, each one flickering like a tiny promise. "Make a wish," Hank said. June leaned close. "You first, Lily." "No, you," Lily insisted. They argued for a few seconds, then finally leaned in together and whispered something no one else could hear. Then they blew out the candles, giggling, hands clasped tightly. Later that night, after the tables were folded and the guests had drifted away, Hank stood alone in the garage bay, taking it all in. The garage still smelled faintly of gasoline and grilled onions. A single balloon floated near the ceiling. The chalk drawings from the party had already begun to fade under the faint mist of evening dew. He walked to the corner where his old cot used to sit, now replaced by a cozy armchair and a bookshelf built by June, and him during one particularly rainy weekend. He didn't recognize this version of his life, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was full. Emma entered quietly holding 2 mugs of tea. "Girls are asleep," she said, handing him one. "Out cold? Like little angels with frosting breath." They stood for a moment, sipping in silence. Then she turned to him. "You saved them," she said. He shook his head. "No, they saved me." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Maybe we all saved each other." A long beat passed. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and smooth. A ring, simple, silver, quietly worn. Emma stared. "I was going to wait," he said, "but waiting's never been my strong suit." She blinked, lips parting. "I don't need big speeches," he said softly. "Just more days like today, more nights like this. You, me, the girls, this life." He slipped the ring into her palm. "Marry me, Em." She looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded, eyes shining. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Outside, the garage lights glowed warmly against the darkening sky. A beacon on the edge of a town that knew how to keep love alive, even when it showed up with scraped knees and a bruised past. The sign out front flickered once, then steadied. Taylor Family Garage. Auto repair and second chances. And beneath it, in smaller letters added just that day, read, "The lights are always on." Because love, real love, wasn't flashy. It didn't need spotlights or fanfare. It needed presence. It needed showing up over and over until broken things became whole, until strangers became family, and a mechanic became a father, not by chance, but by choice. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you, truly. Your time, your heart, and your presence mean more than you know. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel and how they bring us all a little closer together. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances just a little more, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter in this journey of love, hope, and healing. We've got many more stories to share, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing in the power of kindness, in the strength of love, and in the magic of a light that never goes out. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.